Can't control myself around you, Mountain Man warns the city woman, then took her in his cabin. The first snow of winter came down heavy on the mountains, wrapping the peaks in white silence. Down in the thick forest of pine and cedar, the world felt cut off from everything else. But for Elias Carter, the man folks called the Mountain Man, this was home. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard as rugged as the land itself. In town, they whispered about him. Some said he was dangerous. Others claimed he was crazy. But the ones who had seen his eyes knew better. Elias wasn't mad, he was broken. A man who carried so much loss that he had built walls around himself no one could climb. 12 winters he had lived alone, ever since a logging accident took his younger brother's life right in front of him. The guilt never left. He hunted to eat, chopped wood to stay warm, and only went down to town when he absolutely had to. When he did, people stepped aside, not because he asked them to, but because he carried an air of danger, the kind that comes from a man wrestling with grief too heavy for words. Far away from his world was Claire Bennett, a city woman who had never spent a night without the glow of streetlights. She was a journalist, restless and ambitious, sick of writing shallow stories that never mattered. Her editor gave her an assignment that sounded ridiculous: track down the so-called Mountain Man and write about him. Claire had laughed. "What's so special about a hermit chopping wood?" she asked. Her editor only smiled. Sometimes the most broken men carry the most powerful stories. So Claire drove her rented Jeep into the mountains. The higher she climbed, the worse the road got. Snow came down thicker, and soon her Jeep slid into a ditch, tires spinning uselessly. Her phone had no signal. The cold cut deep, and fear started to set in. For the first time in her life, she realized how small she really was against nature. That's when she saw him. A massive figure cutting through the storm, axe on his shoulder, eyes like burning coals under his hood. Elias Carter. Claire tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Mr. Carter? I'm Claire. I came to. Before she could finish, he raised a hand. His deep voice cut through the freezing air. I can't control myself around you. The words froze her in place. But then his face shifted, not threatening, but full of pain. He lowered the axe slowly. You don't understand, he said, softer now. People don't come up here. I keep to myself for a reason. Loneliness, it does things to a man. I don't know what it'll make me do when someone shows up in my world again. Claire's heart pounded, but she saw the truth beneath his warning. This wasn't a monster talking. It was a man afraid of his own hunger for connection. I'm not here to hurt you, she said carefully. And I don't think you'd hurt me either. Elias stared at her a long moment, then nodded. You won't survive the night out here. Come on. He led her through the snow to a cabin tucked into the mountainside. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, it was simple but warm fire crackling, shelves stacked with wood, a table, a bed covered in furs. Elias handed her a steaming mug of pine tea, his big hands trembling slightly, as though he wasn't used to giving comfort. Why are you here? He asked finally. Claire told him the truth about the article, her editor, and her own doubts. Elias listened, eyes fixed on the fire. When she finished, he shook his head. There's no story here. Just a man who failed too many times to belong anywhere else. But Claire wasn't convinced. She had seen how he carried her through the storm, how much hurt lived in his silence. Days passed. The storm outside trapped them together. At first they barely spoke. She wrote in her notebook while he worked outside. But slowly, he opened up. She noticed a carved wooden figure of a boy on his shelf, worn smooth from years of touch. One night, when she finally asked about it, Elias's voice cracked like ice breaking. He was 16, Elias said quietly. My brother. A tree came down too fast. I was right there, but I couldn't stop it. He died in my arms. I was supposed to protect him. The grief in his voice was raw. Claire's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, but she knew this guilt was something he had carried for so long it had become part of him. And yet, she also saw something else. Elias didn't need a story written about him. He needed someone to see him, not as a danger, not as a legend, but as a man who still had worth. One morning, Claire found him struggling with a fallen pine. Without thinking, she jumped in to help. Together they dragged branches, slipping and laughing when they both fell in the snow. For the first time, Elias laughed, really laughed. The sound rolled through the woods like sunshine breaking through clouds. Something changed after that. He taught her how to split logs, how to listen for wolves at night, how to read the stars. She shared her stories of people she had interviewed, the little lessons she carried. Slowly, their worlds braided together. Then, one night, they heard a cry. It was faint, carried by the wind, a child's voice. Elias and Claire ran through the snow and found a boy half buried, blue with cold, no older than 10. A lost hiker's son, his father nowhere in sight. Elias didn't hesitate. He lifted the boy in his arms and carried him back to the cabin. All night, they worked warming him, feeding him broth, wrapping him in furs. Claire saw a different Elias then. His hands were steady, his voice gentle, like he was finally stepping back into the role he had once lost. When the boy whispered thank you, Elias's eyes filled with tears. He turned away, but Claire touched his arm. You saved him, she said softly. Elias shook his head. No. He saved me. When rescuers came days later, the cabin became a place of miracles. Claire knew then her story wasn't about a hermit. It was about a man who had lost faith in himself, only to find it again through compassion. As she packed to leave, Elias stood by the door, silent. She looked at him, notebook in hand. I'll write about you, she said. But not what they expect. I'll write about a man who reminded me that real strength isn't in shutting people out, it's in letting them in. Elias's voice was low. And you? Will you come back? Claire smiled, her eyes shining. You already know the answer. As she drove away, the mountains didn't look lonely anymore. They looked alive, like Elias Carter himself had finally let the light back in. And in that cabin, by the fire, the mountain man waited, not for guilt, not for loneliness, but for hope. Final message. At its heart, this story isn't just about a city woman and a mountain man. It's about all of us, about the walls we build when we're hurt, and the courage it takes to let someone in. It's about how one act of compassion can change not just the life of the one receiving it, but the one giving it too. Because the truth is simple, nobody is too broken to be healed, and nobody is too lost to be found.